Good morning, Year 7s. In this session, we're going to learn about a separating technique. You've been learning about different types of mixtures. You've learnt two so far. The two that we've learnt are solution, and the second one, suspension. So we're going to look at how we can separate suspensions in this video. Remember that a suspension has an insoluble substance in it. It means that the substance has not dissolved. In that respect, it has larger particles than the particles in the water. I'd like to show you a little bit of a demonstration. All right, so if we made our hundred and thousands, the water. Ooh, look at that. And let's say we added something like, from your previous practical, can you think of an insoluble substance that we had from our previous practical? Let's have a think. Magnesium carbonate was, paraffin wax was. Okay, so this is my made up, what we would call a suspension. So the water molecules, the water particles are much smaller than the other substance that I put in there, which we're saying is magnesium carbonate, but it's actually Jaffas. So I have hundred and thousands and I have Jaffas. Now, what I can do, a method I can use to separate would be a filter. Think about where you might have seen or heard of filters before. I've got the heater on at the moment because it's pretty cold. There's a filter in the heater. So if I grab my mixture, and I know you can't quite see me pouring it through the sieve, but I'll show you what the sieve looks like afterwards. Give it a bit of a shake. And let's have a look what's left in the filter or the sieve. The larger particles. Where'd the water go? Where'd the smaller ones go? Where'd the small particles go? There they are. So they were small enough to go through the filter. One other thing with filtration, which we're going to look at today, so we're going to be looking at filtration as a method to separate suspensions, is that we need to use filter paper. Can't use normal paper. So this filter paper, it's got little tiny pores in it, like your skin. Your skin has pores in it. So this filter paper has little tiny pores in it, and it's going to let anything that is sort of the same size as the water particle, so if it's the same size as a water particle, it's going to let it go through the filter paper. If the particle is larger than the water particle, well then it's going to get trapped in our filter paper. It won't fit through those tiny pores. I'm going to show you how to fold a piece of filter paper. So try not to touch too much of it, otherwise the oil on your fingers fills up those little holes in the filter paper. So you fold it in half. You fold it in half again. And then what you do is, I usually say to the students, it's a bit like a mouth. So you've got the four edges. Stick your finger between the first and the second edge. Pop it out. There's your filter paper. And that filter paper goes in what we call a filter funnel, which you guys have already learnt. And can you name the piece of equipment that the funnel is sitting in? In the meantime, I'm just putting a little bit of water in there to hold that filter paper in there. The piece of equipment that the funnel is sitting in is called a conical flask. As you can see, I've got my 2 keen helpers again today. They're helping me out. Aren't they great students? And I might as well use it on this thing. You can use distilled water because all it's doing is just getting the filter paper to sort of stay where you want it to stay. And it's not going to mess up the experiment. I've already put water in the 3 beakers. I've got one labelled charcoal, flour and coffee. So I'm going to now add the substances to those beakers. Have a think. You've watched some videos on this, guys. Have a think which ones might be solutions and which ones might be suspensions while I'm doing this. Charcoal is really cool, guys. It's like the powder that they'd use on a crime scene investigation to bring out fingerprints. And it's very fine, so I don't want to make a mess. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pour those 3 mixtures into the funnel. Now what I need to be very careful of is that I don't go over the top of the paper. So in this one and this one I'm going to have to make sure that I don't fill it all the way to the top. Otherwise the mixture is going to go in between the filter paper and the funnel and it's going to run into my conical flask and I won't have separated anything. So let's have a look. I'm going to do coffee first. Then my flour, and if I just hold my funnel, there you go, once I pour it in, it'll sit in there nicely. Don't go over the top. Okay, I'm going to tip a little bit more in. I want you to think about which ones are solutions and which ones are suspensions. So here's the charcoal one. Here's our flour. Have a look what it looks like in the conical flask. Have a look what it looks like in the beaker. And here's our coffee. Now I'm just going to let this run until they finish and then I'm going to show you what the filter paper looks like. So some more terminology, some new terminology for you to do with filtration is that we have residue and filtrate. Filtrate is what goes through the filter paper and ends up in the conical flask. So the water here is the filtrate. In the filter paper, we have the residue. So in this case, the charcoal is the residue. So this means that this mixture, this one here, was a suspension. What I'll do now is I will take the filter papers out of the filter funnels so that you can see. I might start with this one. So this is a coffee. And have a look at what's in the bottom there, and does it look very similar? We now have our flour. Have a look really carefully at the flour. Have a look. Hang on, I'll go that side. So they look the same or do they look different? Does the filtrate look clear in the bottom of the conical flask? And our charcoal. Have a look at the charcoal compared to the filtrate in the bottom of the conical flask. That's a big difference there. So the filtrate in that conical flask is pure water. There is no charcoal in that one. This is a suspension. So the filtrate is in the conical flask, and here's the residue on the filter paper. So here is our flour mixture, and in the conical flask there is only pure water. That is our filtrate. And in our filter paper, here is our residue. So the particles of the flour and the charcoal were too big to go through the filter paper, so they got stuck. These two mixtures are suspensions. Now, if we have a look at our coffee, can't really see any difference between the mixture and the filtrate. So the coffee is still in the filtrate. There's the filter paper. So what we made with the coffee was a solution, and that means the coffee particles were the same size as the water, and there's no way that we'd be able to use filtration to separate these. There is another type of separation technique that we can use, and we'll look at that in the next video. That's called evaporation. Thank you to my two keen students for helping me out with this demonstration today for the Year 7 Science students. Hope you enjoyed.